happy to have you here. Got so many cool things to talk about. I've got a couple remarks about an interesting public meeting in Massachusetts that occurred yesterday. Before I drone on about all my thoughts, Candace, I know you listened in. Would you be interested in giving the group a lowdown of what people were talking about in Massachusetts yesterday, and maybe your synopsis? Not to put you on the spot or anything, but you're welcome to share if you would like.
Yeah, so the meeting was held at, it was a joint committee on at the Boston State House regarding cannabis policy. And they were asking for some data from the CCC. They were looking for averages, so pass fail on like pesticides and microbes and what have you, whereas I'm asking for absolute values of pesticides detected for every product sold in Massachusetts, such as what they do in Florida by supplying medical patients with the compliance reports that show probably 50 pesticide types and with absolute detection, not just, meet state requirement, pass, fail. And another thing that they're trying to do too is they're trying to eliminate vertical marketing so that it's easier for dispensaries that are recreational to become medical. And there are other items too on the bill. I'm really interested in the open data sets. And then also too, there are others that are interested as well. So it was really great that the conversation was opened up. And there were other bills also, but such as, with medical and what have you. But I did not want to see a physician at every dispensary. So I'm really kind of hoping that maybe doesn't get pushed through. But I am pretty passionate about open data sets and that patients need to be aware of the pesticides, growth hormones, any type of non-natural additives added. But it was great. I recorded it, but so did Keegan.
And there may even be a public recording online, so I'll point you all in the direction. But it was a real interesting discussion because, right, as Candace mentioned, and what's has dominated a lot of the regulatory discussion is just market structure, which as an economist, I understand is really of utmost importance. That's kind of how the market shakes out. I'll need to read more in depth to give my 2 cents on that. And then, of course, there's always sometimes nitpicky safety regulations that people are talking about. And I think some are being discussed there. But the predominant discussion, I think, well, at least half and half, was about open data or access to data. And Candace raised several good points there. Just to look at the glass half full real quick. One thing that we had mentioned in the past was, okay, everybody's talking, quality control. What does that mean? And the people in the laboratory space, they're real big fans of proficiency tests and accreditation. And why is that? Well, different reasons, but my personal belief is, well, if the laboratories aren't very scared of proficiency tests and accreditation, then they must be, that must be like a fairly maybe low bar to jump over. So that's my personal belief is, most labs can pass a proficiency test. If you, go through and check all the check boxes, you can get accredited. So there's a lot of accredited labs out there, and there's a lot of proficiency testing, but people are still complaining like, there's still this kind of sticky issue with the laboratory space. And so we said, okay, well, we're quants here, right? We're data analysts, data scientists. So couldn't we try to quantify what quality control even means? And we took a stab at it a few months ago. And basically, the simplest thing that we could think of was, let's just look at the outcomes at the different laboratories, and then let's look at the averages and use statistics, right? See if any of these averages of outcomes are different. And so, of course, people are interested in how people are measuring THC and CBD, but we noticed, okay, there's a wide variety, wide variance in THC. It's pretty hard to conclude if anyone's statistically different on their THC average. So that's one thing. Then we started to look at, oh, maybe people are measuring contaminants differently, because as Candace was mentioning, that's of importance to particularly medical consumers. And then we started to just notice right off the bat, which is what you want to notice in statistics. You don't want to have to really pull it out. But we noticed that it looked like there were some structural differences with how people were measuring microbes and mycotoxins. I don't remember actually if we looked at this lab by lab variance in pesticides or residual solvents. Either I don't remember a big variance there, or we didn't look at it. But I know we specifically looked at microbe testing, and people were testing differently, to the point where certain labs had like really high failure rates, and some had very low failure rates. And we even looked at licensees, and we saw some licensees even had really high failure rates. Some north of 50%, I want to say. I think that was atypical, but you would run into some licensees that maybe had 30% failure rates, or some like 60% or more. I think there were some that had like a 100% failure rate, but maybe they just sent in 4 samples. And like I said, that would be unfortunate for that licensee, because if you sent in 4 samples, they all failed, you're going to be in a tough boat economically. So we basically said that could basically be a measure of quality control. Just compare yourself to the average. So if you're a licensee and you're failing above average, then you may want to look at your facility and maybe ask some other people, try to find a consultant perhaps, and try to think about ways that you can maybe clean up your facility or lower your risk of failing. So that's on the licensee side. And then on the lab side, we said, okay, people are always talking about standardization. They want standardized results. So similar thing with microbe testing. So say you're screening for microbes. Maybe you notice another lab has a really low failure rate or a really high failure rate. Once again, maybe hire a consultant. Maybe you can call that laboratory up. They may not want to share their trade secrets or this or that, but you could start to, investigate, like, why, right? We're not saying anyone's doing anything wrong, but it's just, just a place to start to look. Maybe the people who have a really high failure rate for microbes aren't doing it correctly. Maybe they're getting a lot of false positives. Whereas, maybe the people who are getting no detections, maybe they're actually the ones measuring it the most accurately. Maybe they're laser focusing in on a particular microbe. So we're not saying anyone's wrong from just having the outcomes they do, but we just thought, okay, that would be an interesting place to just start looking.
And the other thing too is that Florida is so transparent, right, Keegan? 18,000 COAs they have on their dispensary websites for patients, whereas Massachusetts, it took me 4 months to get the COAs for the Curaleaf product purchase. So that's another thing in my testimony too to the State House. Otherwise, sorry to interrupt.
Well, good point. And I'll do the other side of the glass real quick, because I've got a couple things about Florida, but the main takeaway is, ask, right? So a lot of laboratories in the state have been asking for the data transparency. I think there is a couple testimonials right? I think one was maybe the CEO of MCR Labs. But various people spoke, some pro and some against. But as I said, it's good that the conversation's going there, that you can at least ask. Candace did mention that ultimately, these are just statistics. And so this now gets to the sticky and the interesting part, right? Once you get to statistics, things get controversial.
But also, too, I'm a medical patient in both states. And in Florida, I can get access to all the COA and compliance test information for pesticides and, the other analytes. But in Massachusetts, I can't. So I'm really hoping that my testimony might add that medical spin, that as a snowbird, full transparency in Florida, no transparency really in Massachusetts. So I'm hopeful.
Well, I'll just quit dancing around the subject and just go ahead and get all my remarks out there. Okay. Massachusetts. The regulations for the public to see these statistics, because that's sort of where the rubber meets the road, was just actually having the public or the move, right? In my opinion, the public are the movers and the shakers, right? Because the policymakers, the regulators, I think, should already have access to these statistics. This bill's just for the public to see them. So I think the state, if they wanted to, they could already see if there's a discrepancy between failure rates from one lab to the other. But they don't have to do anything about it unless the public knows. So it's just like, so the regulators may know that one lab has a 0% failure rate and another lab has a 10% failure rate. But unless the public knows, they don't have to act on it. And so then it's basically, as soon as the public knows that, hey, why is, like, what's going on here? This lab's detecting microbes, this one's not. Then the regulators actually get their feet held to the fire, and then they actually have to go look at it. And then the laboratories, there was a really telling remark. One of the laboratory, maybe scientific officers, spoke, and there was a really telling remark where I may be not paraphrasing correctly, so once again, double check the official record. But it was basically like, we have to be a little cautious about, letting the public see the data, because they may not understand it and they may put a laboratory on blast, which is very scary. Well, that's sort of the point, right? We just mentioned that laboratories aren't scared of proficiency testing. They're not scared of accreditation, but, maybe it's okay for laboratories to be a little scared, that they may actually get, called out if they're not, testing properly. And I just think it's a little demeaning of the general public, because I think a good way to go about life is to actually think of others as smart, super smart. In fact, I think it could even be in Dale Carnegie's, How to Make Friends and Influence People. But you almost want to approach everyone as if they have something that they can share with you, right? They have some bit of knowledge out there. So there's tons of smart people in the general public. There's chemists, there's biologists. Just because they're not in the cannabis space doesn't necessarily mean they're not educated. And then it's also sort of like I talked about the panopticon approach. And I was trying to think of an analogy, and I'm sure there's better ones, but I was thinking about speeding. Like, so if you knew, like, say, where every, police officer was, well, then you just wouldn't speed near them, and you would just speed everywhere else. But the fact that there are, some undercover cop cars here and there, you basically don't know which car is a potential police officer. So there may be no police officers on the road, but you just don't speed because you just never know who's looking. So it's not the best analogy, but it's a similar thing with lab results. Washington State, they're all public. Chances are very few people are looking at these, right? We're looking at them, but scantly, right? I've only got so much time in my day. And so I only do like a really thorough look at the Washington lab results. I don't know, maybe once every few months, once a year. So I'm only doing a small look, but they don't know. They don't know who's looking. It could be, Jim McRae, who I think has a company, Straight Line Analytics, and he's been looking at these for a long time. Or maybe it's, remember our good friend Isaac in Massachusetts. Maybe he's looking at them, or Candace. So really anyone all over the world could be looking at these lab results. Maybe nobody is, but just the thought that, somebody could look at these and call me out if I'm not doing it properly, I think that puts the right incentive in place where the laboratories, they button up and they follow the book. They do everything by the rules because, who knows who's going to be looking at the certificate and nitpicking it. So anywho, let's get to the more fun stuff now, the actual data science. But I just kind of wanted to call this to your attention because once again, this bill may not go anywhere. So just be prepared for that because, as I said, who is actually the one who's going to be held to the fire? It's really the regulators, right? Because they already have that data. This is just a bill for the public to be able to see that data. And so the regulators may not be thrilled about that. So we'll see how things materialize. But we don't, as I said, the public are the movers and the shakers. So I'll show you basically how the public's moving the ball forward in Florida and how there's still a little room to go. So I'll just share with you real quick. Also, before I dive into this, I know I've been talking a long time. Robert, May, or Rick, would you all want to chime in or have any thoughts on this while I start to change gears a little bit?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah, one very brief thing is I looked at the Washington lab results, and I mentioned that one technical item where the results column had a list of lists, and I used Python, and it took me literally, or it took the computer, a brand new laptop with an i9, to iterate through 10,000 records. It took almost 24 hours. So now I have like 1 million rows of that lab result column that's been extracted into a proper database format. So I'll get you the rest of it, but just as an interesting experiment, it took me a while to loop through all of that. So it should be a lot of interesting data there. And, so I'll mix it in with my data science classes. So it's good to have, a second computer going while I'm studying on the other stuff. So yeah, I'll get some good info to you real soon here.
And I love it. So Robert's taking a look at these Washington lab results, and there's a lot of data there because it's basically every time a sample is sent into the laboratory, there's so many data points that are generated, right? It's getting screened for cannabinoids, potentially residual solvents, foreign matter, moisture, water activity, maybe mycotoxins, microbes, and then pesticides. So, between all of these, you could easily get close to 100 or maybe sometimes more than 100 analytes that were tested. And that's why I think this is such rich, valuable data that I think a lot of you awesome data scientists should look at, because there's a lot there. And I don't know, my first take is maybe we haven't fully understood all of this data. So that's what we're after. But thank you for your noble work, Rick. Basically organizing, standardizing, and making the data accessible is what it's all about. So you did a lot of the hard work. However, now that you've got it in a nice, I think, SQL table, hopefully you can start doing queries and start asking and answering interesting questions.
Yep, definitely.
Ooh. Well, on that note, let me share my screen with you and get you 1,200 more messy laboratory samples. And, once again, that's probably, north or close to 10,000 or more analytes that were tested. Maybe a little shy of that, but I'm barely getting to it all. Okay, so speaking of lots and lots of data points, in, say, Florida, this is what you'd be looking to get. So if you purchased this Khalifa Kush 8th produced by True Leaf, I guess we don't know where this sold, but what one of the medical dispensaries in Florida, you'd want to try to get a hold of this as a good data steward. And as Candace mentioned, Candace is a medical patient in Florida, wouldn't mind, I think, right, trying to just track your consumption of cannabinoids. And also, ideally, make sure, you're not consuming any contaminants, or at least keeping your contaminant consumption to a minimum, right? You want to minimize that as much as possible. And we pointed out in previous meetups how flower in particular, but most cannabis products, I think edibles are the most stable, but even concentrates, there's a good amount of variability. But right in this 8th, right? So this is 3.5 grams. So we've got milligrams per gram here. So actually, do I even have a script open here? Let's go ahead and open up a script here so we can start doing some interesting things while we talk about the data. The first one's just do a little bit of math, right? So there was about 314 milligrams per gram of THCA. Phenomenal. So that's, if you purchase this flower, you would be getting almost a little bit more than 1 gram of THCA. So we've mentioned in the past that, say you're trying to regulate your consumption of THCA, or maybe you're trying to regulate your consumption of CBG. Well, you'll have to, basically do, a little bit of math. Maybe you've got, a set of scales or what have you. And, you can, allot various portions of this 8th, or I was just looking at like daily consumption. So maybe you just kind of want to trend over time. But regardless, the first step is just getting this data So like I said, lots of cool things you can do with it, or interesting and enlightening and helpful things that you can do with the data. But as I said, first things first, you need to get it. So in Florida, people have been asking for this a lot, and now they're starting to put, QR codes right on the label. You scan the QR code, and ideally, you get this certificate. And why do you want this certificate? Because you've got the cannabinoids. Notice here real quick, terpene summary. So ideally, you actually want to scroll down here and get the full list of all the terpenes. Because remember, a non-detect is in fact a data point, because, right, there was, for example, there was no, I think this is, delta 3 carine, or alpha cedrine, or alpha philandrine, or alpha terpenine, right? That's an interesting one. I think you'd want to know that there's no alpha terpenine in this, right? So if you just look at the terpene summary, you know which terpenes are in it, but you don't know which ones weren't detected. So already you gain a little bit of knowledge by knowing the non-detects, because maybe they just didn't even test for alpha terpenine, because then it may be in there, it may not be, they didn't test for it. So I think this will be useful data moving forward, because as I'm kind of finding out, like at these cannabis science conferences and things, people are discovering more and more terpenes, and which ones are significant and interesting to look for. So that's one thing. A data point that's worth writing down is the moisture content, because there are scientists out there who think that if you were going to, and once again, I think there's like I said, there are scientists who make the argument that if you're going to compare different flowers, it's pretty standard with botanical products to adjust for the moisture content, because I think the idea is this 3.5 grams of Khalifa Kush is, where's that number, is 13.28% water. So, of your 3.5 grams, is that right? You're going to be getting almost half a gram of water. That's what it is, right? It's a flower product. So technically, I don't know. Once again, I need to think about this number more. But once again, it's worth jotting down, because now you can at least know sort of the moisture content in your flower. Ooh, thought, comment, question?
Yeah, I was just curious, the moisture content, if anyone knows if there are terpenes that could be lost due to evaporation, and so that could, maybe that lower moisture content, that terpene wouldn't show up, but a higher moisture content means that it was preserved. Does that make sense? I'm just trying to come up with a use case of where the moisture percentage would, we compare it with something else to maybe extract some insight.
So this may not be super reassuring, but from my understanding, some of these terpenes maybe are readily evaporating at room temperature. So I think that's even like what gives cannabis its smell. So if you, and we'll talk about this momentarily, like someone had mentioned garlic, these garlic strains. From my understanding, if you smell a really strong garlic strain, and it's got a distinct smell. Those are the actual terpenes. I forget what the correct word is, maybe aromatizing, but they're basically evaporating off of the plant and going up your nose in small amounts. So I guess the way I picture it is like almost if you're holding a cannabis flower, you can't see it, but I would imagine there's just almost just like fumes coming off of the flower, right? And so like, dogs can, smell the cannabis flower. So you almost, I guess, want to think about this as like a snapshot in time. So it's like they got the flower, they got it to the lab, the second they extracted it, put it in the diluent. So maybe they put it in methanol or acetonitrile, or maybe it's just going straight onto the GC. So it's just, which is just, from my understanding, I think you just put a little bit of flour in a little capsule, and then that basically just gets heated right onto the instrument. So it's basically, so as to your question, like this actual percentage, I think is a little snapshot in time. So this is probably always going to be kind of diminishing as time goes on. Does water affect the rate this diminishes? I have no idea. I don't think like the terpenes would be like in the water themselves, right? The terpenes, I don't know where in the plant they actually are. They may be in the trichomes. But a hypothesis is that, maybe, this is a compact flower bud. Maybe if there's like moisture in there, like little H2O molecules in there, maybe that just, prevents some of the terpenes from evaporating. But who knows? That's just a pure conjecture. So that's actually a real interesting question, and maybe room for some research.
Yeah, definitely. The reason I asked is I had talked to some guys that had inside information on whether or not the moisture content affected THC levels in lab results. Now, this was a few years back, so this might not be the case anymore, but it seemed that there was kind of a golden area of moisture when submitting your flower that would yield better or higher THC results. So I was just curious if there was like a, something similar with terpenes as well. But
and that could even be a quirk of the actual lab testing itself, because it's a non-trivial thing to actually test cannabis flower, because from my understanding, like the flower has a lot of like fats and lipids, and as we pointed out, it's got out of the 3.5 grams, half a gram of water itself. So it's when you're testing this, you're basically just putting the whole concoction of the flower plant itself onto the scientific instrument. So I think there's techniques you can do to try to get rid of some of the fats and lipids and things. But it could almost just cause maybe inaccuracies in the testing. Maybe, I don't know. So
yeah, I didn't get a very scientific explanation from him. It was almost kind of like a wise tale type of a thing, but he believed that it worked and went by that. But he didn't have any actual data that he was looking at or anything. So yeah, like you said, it's an interesting point for research. So don't want to take us down any further down that rabbit hole, but yeah, I'll look into it and see if I find anything interesting.
Please look into it, Rick, because obviously this was of importance to the producer, right? This was something they look for when they're trying to send their sample in for testing, which is pretty important to people. And so why it may work, it could be a couple factors. One, it could actually be something structural, right? Maybe there is something about the water and the terpenes. And then there also could just be maybe there's some quirk in testing where maybe there's the way the labs calibrate their instruments. Maybe they can handle certain levels of moisture better than others. But anywho, as I said, the jury's still out, so that's why get the data so that way you can do some statistics on it. And I always found this interesting because I actually tested moisture content in the laboratory, and it can be quite variable. And it's it's one of the things that the analyst knows that, okay, this is going to be quite variable, and so the analyst takes into consideration that, okay, you may want to give a little bit of wiggle room to this 13.28% number. But the producers, they put so much faith into these numbers sometimes, and so sometimes that's where there's a little miscommunication, I think, because maybe the producer is putting a lot of weight into the 13.28, but from the laboratory's point of view, it's not really statistically different than the, say, 13%, because they may have an internal laboratory margin of error. So anywho, that's a tiny little data point, but when you want to get, let me let in a guest real quick. Oh, Hector's joining us. So anywho, want to get the moisture content. Would like to go ahead and get the microbes and mycotoxins. It's interesting kind of where I stand on these. Once again, you don't want moldy cannabis, and that's, I think, definitely something you want to watch out for. Personally, I think I don't know. I'm thinking the microbe screening is maybe going a little overboard, like a little overkill, because basically, from my understanding, microbes are just ubiquitous, right? Like, I think they're like on the table, they're on the food, they're in the, they're in the air. So I think there's always maybe just maybe a small amount of them, but it's just like you don't want a lot of mold. So I think there's a give and a take. So I guess you can't be too stringent, maybe because you'll be kind of getting maybe like a false positive in the sense that it's maybe not like positively dangerous. But once again, I'm going to kind of defer this to some microbiologists and things, but I think it's at least looking at this data. But this is a landscape that's still developing because there's pretty strong stances on both sides. But as I said, the one thing that we can do is just get the data, and then people can look at it. And then the final thing are the pesticides. And these are and this is a data point that I feel pretty strongly about. Personally, I just am trying to avoid pesticides. I know they're out there, right? We talked about how these like DDT breakdown chemicals are just still out there, and they're just kind of hard to avoid. So I understand that there's maybe some background contamination here and there. So you just like to keep that to a minimum. But the main thing is, maybe somebody's, spraying a lot of one of these pesticides and another producer's not. Personally, and I don't know if these are permitted or completely banned. So in fact, I think even pesticide use in cannabis is maybe a contentious topic, because some people feel that you're not even supposed to use pesticides because they made an argument that cannabis is such a gray area. But I think maybe the FDA may have to approve, or maybe there's some regulatory body, maybe the Department of Agriculture. I don't know who does it, but I think somebody approves pesticides for use on various crops. So, for example, I think the way they do this in Washington State is, I think the Washington State Department of Agriculture has said that, okay, cannabis licensees are approved to use this subset of pesticides. And so I don't know if they're allowed to technically use all of these, or if maybe they're just screening for some of these for safety's sake. So once again, that's sort of where my knowledge ends, and then I encourage you to kind of do your own research to fill in the gaps. Okay, so why am I droning on about all these data points? Well, because Candace said that, you know, people have been asking for these. Well, one thing you have to look at the fine print for is this is a compliance test. So this was a test that was, you know, submitted to the state of Florida to say that the laboratory performed all of these tests. One thing I've noticed as we've gone about collecting these lab results is I keep seeing, and once again, this may be just a quirk of this this one laboratory. However, I noticed, and I don't know if they all use this language. However, I want to say I noticed at least 3 or 4 laboratories doing this practice where, look, this is the patient COA, and it does say that it was tested for these contaminants, and they do list the cannabinoids and the terpenes that were detected. But notice this, where we don't have the results, right? All it says is pesticides were passed. You know, it says the moisture was passed, the microbes were passed, but we only have one page here. So unfortunately, this is sort of where, we're not, it's, we're not over yet. The struggle to get lab results is not over, because if, say, the laboratory submitted this COA to the state of Florida, I don't think the state of Florida would accept that. They would be like, great, but you're missing, all the results. So this is, I think, sort of why people have described it, I think, in the Reddit forum as pulling teeth to get these lab results. Because it's just like, the patients are like, we're demanding them, like, come on, we want the lab results, we want the lab results, we want the lab results. And then they're like, okay, here are the lab results. But, unless you're like, you really, know your stuff about laboratory testing, you wouldn't really know right off the bat that this isn't, from my understanding, this isn't like the actual COA that was submitted to the state of Florida. From the look of this, and this is once again my conjecture, and we've basically there's an advocate in Oregon who, his big complaint is the laboratories at the end of the day, they make their money from selling this certificate. Or selling this analyses. And anyone who's in business knows that what do you do in business? You try to make your client happy. So people are pestering TrueLeave for lab results. TrueLeave notices, okay, other companies, and once again, I don't want to pick on TrueLeave, because here actually is a full TrueLeave COA by ACS Laboratory. So I don't know what exactly is going on here. And this one's even pretty recent. But like I said, I've seen this at other laboratories too. So I'll point you in the direction of those COAs. And then I'll get onto some fun stuff here in a second. But so I don't really want to pick on them for any reason. But my hypothesis of what may be going on here is people in Florida are asking for COAs. Some producers have started to provide those because there's pressure for them. Other producers want to provide them, but they don't necessarily want to just show patients in Florida all of the contaminants, because there may be, a trace amount of, abamectin, or, there may be, this one doesn't. See, this is a clean green. This is what I would like to look for. But once again, it may have a tiny minuscule amount of one of these pesticides. It still passes, and that's okay. And once again, patients may or may not care. But the point being is, I don't think there's like a law in Florida that says that you have to provide this to patients. And so what it looks like to me is they're kind of trying to pass this off as the official COA, because it kind of satisfies what the consumers are after, because most people, they just want to know the cannabinoids and the top terpenes. So this is phenomenal. So as I said, on the glass half full side, I'll take it, right? I've said in the past, any data is better than no data. So, bravo for, at least providing us with, the cannabinoid and the terpene summary. Ooh, thought, comment, question?
It's Hector. Does
Yes.
the fact that cannabis is illegal federally cause problems on improving the pesticides?
Yes. It's a gray area. Someone in Oregon who was a organic farmer, so they're clearly biased towards no pesticides, but they made the argument that because it's federally illegal, like I said, I forget what the accrediting body is, if it's the FDA or the Department of Agriculture. I think it's probably one of those, but it could be another. They basically approve certain pesticides for various crops. And from my understanding, if it's not approved by them, you're not allowed to use it. I think basically, just like cannabis, right? Cannabis is not federally permitted. Certain states like Washington have stepped in to say, at a state level, our state is permitting it. So in Washington, I think they say, okay, we're permitting licenses to use these pesticides. So once again, the state may permit them to use the pesticides. Technically, the FDA or maybe the USDA could maybe go make a fuss about it. I don't think they've done that from my understanding, but they may. Once again, it'd be a whole can of worms, and I doubt like any regulator wants to go step in that. But from my understanding, people are using pesticides, but as you pointed out, Hector, it's not clear if it's just like cannabis itself. It's not really clear if it's permitted.
Thank you.
But anywho, like I said, I think it's important to see the data, because it's like pulling teeth. The companies realized, okay, we can let people know the cannabinoids and terpenes without that affecting our bottom dollar. And in some cases, may actually be a marketing tool. But it still seems that, the producers and via the producers, maybe the laboratories themselves, because at the end of the day, like, I don't want to say that this is the case. I'm trying to be careful with this, but could be that maybe the producer said, hey, could you make us a COA that just has the cannabinoids and terpenes and the overall status? And the lab's like, yeah, sure, we can do that. It's not breaking any rules. We'll still submit this compliance test to the state, and then you can show your patients this COA. Once again, it may be perfectly by the book, but in my opinion, like Candace said at the very beginning, I think you should be able to see a very granular breakdown of what's in your products. So I think you should be able to get this full COA. Some cases you can. Once again, it's sort of the panopticon approach. Maybe nobody ends up looking at your pesticide screening, but just the fact that they can look at it will make you check all your, dot all your I's, cross all your T's, make sure you're doing everything by the book, because maybe nobody's looking, but maybe they will check. So once again, so just to go ahead and just show you, a little data with the time that's left, and then maybe I'll actually save some of it for next week, since we only have like 5 minutes left, and I don't want to rush through it all. It's too much cool, good material. So I'll post it all to GitHub, so that way maybe you could look at it over the next week, because I've got some cool OpenAI API queries that we can do, but they're not really on topic with what we were doing today. So I can at least show you these Florida lab results, since that's what we were actually talking about. So once again, this is the most recent, actually probably the most recent one's the one at the top. This is just the most recent observation I've collected from Florida. And if any of you are interested, Canlytics has been writing these COA parsing algorithms. And we recently started with Florida. And I've written a crude algorithm for Keisha Labs, and see Keisha, and then one for ACS Laboratories. But yeah, I don't have many. So here's a cake face flower. And we're just collecting various data points about these. May have that's not the right one. I may have the actual certificate here. I'd like to try to pull it up if we can real quick. So here's just a random one. We'll see if this is a full COA. See, this one's just a patient COA. So as I said, I've observed a mix of them in Florida. Ideally, we would like to get the official compliance COA, the compliance test for this cake face 8th, because that way we could know all the pesticides and everything in it. But okay, that's okay. Once again, as I said, this is an observation, so we can at least observe this data. So, okay, so this is a cake face, flower, various levels of cannabinoids, 28% total THC, almost 3% terpenes. So this is probably a flower that you would smell when you open the jar, I would assume. So anywho, lots of cool data points here. As I said, we're missing a bunch of the pesticides and things, but and some of the terpenes. But this is a work in progress, so I'm going to share this data with you right after the meetup, and I'd encourage you all to look through it, because this is basically the cursory look I've been able to do. I've only really been able to basically you've already seen all the stuff I've figured out. I basically figured out that, okay, some are compliance tests and some are patient COAs. So that's as far as I've gotten. So that's what's interesting about this is, although these are public, there's only so much time in the day. So maybe the ACS laboratories and Trulieve, maybe they're scared to death about these lab results being out there, but it's like, you're maybe scared for no reason, because it's like, I haven't even had time to barely look at these. So once again, I encourage you all to take a look, because like I said, there's no need to, like I said, in fact, I even kind of applaud Trulieve and ACS Labs for just getting these out there. Like I said, right, they're doing a lot of things, running the I don't even know what this instrument is, the LCUV. But they're running these, the ICP-MS. That's I want to say those may cost north of $200,000 or $300,000, and you probably need a specialized chemist to operate it, right? So that's what they're doing. They're running these scientific experiments, or tests. So they only have so much time in their day. Trulieve is growing the actual cannabis, so they only have so much time in their day. So okay, this is what they can do. They can post it online. Awesome. Then we can run the final mile. As Robert is finding out, sometimes it's a bit more than a mile. But we can run this last little distance, get the lab results. And now we can actually do something interesting with it. So someone was mentioning garlic. Well, we know about the beta pinene to D-limonene ratio. And so this is just the first thing that I look at when I'm trying to understand a variety. I'm sure there's a lot more to this. So I encourage you all to look at these garlic strains. But it's like, okay, I look at the beta pinene to D-limonene ratio. It looks like they're kind of clustering around here, maybe 0.05 to 0.5. Okay, 0.05 to 0.5, about 0.1. Or this one, maybe 0.15 to 1.5, 0.15 to 1.5. Once again, close to about 0.1. So about a 1 to 10 beta pinene to D-limonene ratio. So right off the bat, my Bayesian hypothesis is this is a super strong indica, or what people would think of as an indica. So I kind of had a sneaking suspicion that may be the case, but now we actually have not many, but we've got 12 observations, right? So before, well, we maybe had some in different states, but in Florida we had before this 0. Now we at least have 12 observations. And once again, these are rosins. So you'll have to look at the sample types and things like that. But already, I've never seen a ratio that low. Remember, I was telling you that I thought maybe the strongest indica was around 0.15. So now, this is now, I think, the strongest indica that I have personally observed. So now that could maybe be an insight. Once again, take it with a grain of salt. And I encourage you all to do your own analysis, but now I kind of know. So it's like, okay, now when somebody says they've got, garlic cake or garlic pop or garlic butter, before I had no idea if that was more on the sativa side or indica side. Now I'm kind of thinking, okay, maybe it's more on the indica side. This one may put you to sleep. So once again, it may not. There's tons of more data exploration to do, but this is just, a way that we can start making some rhyme or reason out of this. So once again, maybe various patients in Florida can augment this data. So maybe they're using all these samples, and then for each sample, maybe they're journaling, okay, you know, I had a good effect with this one. I had a bad effect with this one. I had a good effect with that one, right? And then the patients could do their own personalized statistics. Because remember, 12, you only need 8 observations to, once again, I may be butchering this, but from my understanding, if you can predict all 8 of 8 perfectly, then I think you can be 95% confident. I may be butchering those statistics, but you know, if you were just rating these, you know, 0 to 1, you know, I like it or I don't like it, and you could then build a model that perfectly predicts that if you like it or you don't like it, and you can do it with a sample size of 8. I mean, you can do that, right? But maybe. Once again, it's always good to get your sample size large, and we're going to be working on that. But you can do a lot with a small sample. So I'll save some of this cool AI material for you for next week, because there's no way I'll be able to get through it all today, and it's too much cool, good material to rush through. I know I spent forever just talking about COAs and data this time, so maybe not the funnest time ever. Hopefully you found it interesting. Any thoughts, comments, questions? I'll at least share the data set with you for coming, and the code.
I found it strange that they would have 2 different types of COAs available, that they would even split the market that way by not giving everyone all the information. Excuse
Well,
me.
patients
Yes.
in Florida have to request compliance reports. I haven't found that online, but I found the compliance report on the like the Facebook group for the medical patients, and you know, there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of data there. The patients are, you know, kind of getting smart too. Plus, you know, people are wondering, are there pesticides causing my stomach pain? Are the pesticides causing my lymph node issues? Right? I get it, because there's some state weed that really makes my lymph nodes react, and it never happens with my homegrown that's legal in Massachusetts. So, you know, as a patient, we really need to know about this, what's going on, how, you know, because there's a lot of rushing and corner cutting, you know, with the state weed. Florida has a real problem. You know, people open it up and it's moldy, and it's just, you know, there are people that like keep saying maybe we should stick with legacy. It might be healthier. But I don't do legacy, you know, in Florida, so I have a card.
Well, the glass, the bong half full on this one is the squeaky wheel gets the oil, and it's just like we just have to keep trying. And I think I applaud all the patients in Florida, right? They've been squeaky, so they've right first they were squeaky, squeaky, squeaky. They got medical cannabis, and they're awesome. Well, let's be squeaky, squeaky, squeaky. We want to know what's in our medical cannabis. And like it's kind of like pulling teeth, you know, it's slowly, but and then to get to Hector's point, you know, oh, it's surprising that, you know, they're, you know, trying to withhold some of the lab results. And, you know, to me, it's not super surprising. And kind of like the Massachusetts public discussion where, you know, even maybe the laboratories who are doing things correctly, they're just a little bit scared of people actually looking at the data. And so, you know, the labs aren't thrilled about the idea of their data being out there. The producers aren't super thrilled about having their screening tests out there. But as Candace pointed out, you know, it should be something that the consumers can at least see, right? They may not all look into it in depth. You know, they may not all be parsing COAs and applying statistics to them like we are, but you should at least be able to, you know, scan or at least put your eyeballs over a COA. And this is where we get back to just keep being squeaky and keep asking, because unfortunately it may come down to the kind of like in Washington where there's actually just a state rule that says, yes, if a consumer asks for a COA, you do have to show it to them. So I think that may not be a law in Florida. So it just may be people are asking for them. The producers realize there's that pressure there, and they're trying to pass that one off. But we're smart, right? And that's where we get back to at the beginning, right? The public's smart. And so it's, we figured that one out. It was like, it took me a second too. It was sort of a, nice try. It's like, thank you. We do appreciate the cannabinoids and terpenes. But ultimately, I think, it's up to the patients in Florida. If they want this, keep asking for it. But that's the thing is, make sure to ask for we want to see the compliance test.
And
now,
also too, because that way we could pick maybe a pesticide that we're not as allergic to. Because you have to remember, patients are where all this cannabis legalization were rooted from. And we just need to know. We need to know the additives put in, the non-natural, anything other than cannabis. Is it in the weed? Let us know. I don't know.
I agree with you. And as I said, it's a sticky issue, sticky subject. And the only thing I know to do is just keep asking, keep collecting data, keep using statistics. It's a slow process, but if anything, I think the meeting in Massachusetts was sort of, it's quite reassuring that we're on the right track. We're at least adding our voices to the conversation and, helping people learn and find out more and encouraging people to ask questions. So, well, too cool. The lesson of the day today may be make sure to read the fine print, or especially read the fine print. That's where a lot of the interesting details are hiding. Well, thank you for staying extra long today. Thank you for coming, lending your eyes, your ears, your thoughts, questions, and keeping the conversation going. Thank you.
Thanks, Keegan. Bye, everybody. See you next week.
Until next week, everyone.
Thank you. See you next week.
Be productive.